The world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, Fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Welcome back after a week off last week, our first in a year. Wow. I hope everyone's enjoying the summer, wherever they are, and having some fun. We've got some amazing guests lined up over the next few months, so stay tuned. We're also increasingly active with our newsletter lately. If you'd like to be a part of that, you can subscribe on our website at bankingthefuture.com. Today we've got one for the entrepreneurs. We've had some great episodes with venture capitalists and founders going through the most interesting opportunities they're seeing, ideas about areas of fintech ripe for further innovation, startup advice, and more. Today we're pulling all that together in one place, in a nod to our founder and aspiring founder listeners. A lot of the questions that come up most often in our community are around turning concepts into action. One of our core tenets at Rebank is that it's delivery that matters. The discussion and analysis of high-level ideas and trends are part of the work that takes place around and in support of execution. But with no action, the reflection is only so relevant. Today, we hear from a number of past guests, including Michael Kent of Asimo, Steve Lemon of Currency Cloud, Nigel Verdon of Rebank, Alex McPherson of Octopus Ventures, Carolina Brochato of Atomico, Michael Tresco of 8 Roads, Amaya Upadhyay of Omidyar, Charlie Delingpool of Comply Advantage, and Aman Guy of Orange Growth Capital. As always, connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or on our website at bankingthefuture.com. If you like today's show, please subscribe on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice and leave us a review. Please enjoy today's special episode on starting a fintech. Michael Kent, founder and CEO of Asimo, kicks us off, talking about the lessons he took away from his first startup, money transmission company Small World. Did you make any mistakes in building or scaling Small World? Did you take any lessons away from that experience that have benefited you since?
I mean, we made pretty much every mistake in the book, so I don't know where you want to start. But no, we took too much dilution on the first round. We were significantly capital constrained nearly straight out of business school. So that was a very expensive first set of cash that we raised. But we're very grateful to those guys, and I'm lucky enough to call them investors in this latest venture as well. So that was expensive. I think financial services and technology takes a lot longer than you think. So I think particularly the scaling speed of things is a bit slower. I think the technology takes longer to build. I think you have to be 100% on top of your regulatory responsibilities, and we didn't transact a number of companies. We got them all the way down the road and then decided not to buy them on the basis of regulatory questions, and that was no doubt the right thing to do, but I think we would have come to that a lot faster these days. We're much more on top of that piece of work, and yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of things, but I don't regret them. I think each one was a lesson. Small World's still doing very well now, and I think, we got away with it.
Michael went on to discuss his angel investing, which he now does in addition to running Asimo. Pay particular attention to what he looks for in the founders he backs. In addition to your work at Asimo, you also invest in and advise startups. If I'm not mistaken, you started investing after exiting Small World. What drove you to become a startup investor?
Well, Ricky and I had actually done a few things along the way, where we took whatever we kind of made at Small World and just tried to find the next opportunity. And it was always in consumer financial services, pretty much, and associated industries. And we just really enjoyed it. It's a massive buzz working with management teams who are solving hard problems in consumer finance. And as you've been in it for longer and longer, sometimes you have some useful thoughts or some useful connections to share with those entrepreneurs. But yeah, why did I get into it? Because I'm super excited about the intersection of technology and finance, and what else would I do with the money other than invest it in interesting businesses? So yeah, I get a real buzz. In fact, I probably get more out of it than the companies I invest in, I'm sure. But yeah, it's exciting stuff.
How did you build deal flow initially when you first started looking to invest?
Basically, people come to us. It's people we meet in the course of going out there and trying to build a business. So you entrepreneurs, particularly in financial services, are quite good at talking to each other, swapping tips, trying to stay ahead of the game and each other. And it's quite close-knit community. It's not huge, even though the attention that fintech's been getting is sort of a bit crazy these days. It's not a huge community of people. And I guess we've tried to be, in the businesses that we're involved in, as useful as we possibly can.
Are you still actively investing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm looking at something at the moment, actually. Yeah, no, definitely. It's not a well managed piece. We have a vehicle, Hexagon Partners, that we invest through, but it's really just stuff that we think is interesting. In fact, it's not. It's people that we think are interesting.
Actually, that was going to be my next question. What is it specifically that you're looking for in investment opportunities?
Incredibly resilient and get shit done entrepreneurs who have a lust for changing stuff. Particularly if you're investing early stage, super early stage, seed and pre-series A, it's all about the team. It's a little bit about the opportunity and how they think about it, but it's really how they think about it. So it's about how the team thinks, who the personality is, do they have resilience. I know more than most that it's not a linear ride up to the top or even up to the middle in financial services in particular. So, I just look for people who will deal with adversity, be able to come through it and really want to kick ass in their sector. And I think that's the most important thing.
What advice would you have for fintech entrepreneurs? If you were to start another company now, what would you do the same or differently compared to Small World or Asimo?
So I actually regret I got started late in my career. So I'd done my MBA and it was a couple of years afterwards that I started doing this. I think that's changing. I think the acceptance of being an entrepreneur and getting your entrepreneurial chops early is changing. And I think there's a lot more jobs in startups these days. So the advice I'd give is just get on with it. Don't let the regulatory requirements scare you off. Don't not do the work, but understand that if you can build a good business in a regulated sector, then you've got a moat that is pretty valuable. And then the other thing I'd say is go out and ask for advice. There are lots of people who have done this stuff. Everyone has a viewpoint. You don't have to take it on board, but there's an ecosystem of supportive entrepreneurs in this sector, and they can be supported with advice. They can be supported with money. They can be supportive in terms of introductions and how to do things. Don't always trust what they say, and don't always do what they say. But that's a nice thing about this sector in the UK.
Potentially related question: to what do you personally ascribe your entrepreneurial success?
Wow. So yeah, like most entrepreneurs, I'm not entirely sure how successful I am, but it's been quite a ride. It's a good question. I think it's just resilience, and that's what I look for in every company that I potentially invest in. Every entrepreneur I potentially invest in is getting shit done, and when it's hard. Somebody said to me last week that running a fintech business was like getting punched in the face 100 times a day, and then occasionally somebody would give you a cocktail that you could drink before getting punched in the face again. I thought, in many ways, that's a good analogy. Yeah, I think you just gotta keep at it. And if you keep at it, you will be successful.
Steve Lemon has founded multiple payments businesses, including Currency Cloud. He's a doer, and he tells it like it is. Here's what he's thinking about. What are you most excited about in fintech, and why?
I'm not going to say the B word because I think we're just beginning to come out of the trough of disillusionment there. But you are starting to see real stories on that. You're starting to see products. I actually met somebody at a PwC event the other day, and he was talking about his product and his service. And he was talking about it in specific terms of the use case and the solutions that he was providing and the problems he was addressing. And there's about 20 minutes into the conversation, I said, hang on, this isn't a blockchain story. He goes, yeah, it is. I said, congratulations. This is the first use case I've heard where you haven't led with the technology, and nobody cares about the technology really. So that's that. But the other thing I'm really excited about is machine learning, AI. I think there's a lot to come from that.
If you had to do it all again, what would you do differently?
There's a lot I would do differently actually. There's a lot you'd be able to do a lot more easily. as I said a couple of times already, just the nature of the collaborative economy now, it's much easier to actually build and get a product stood up. One of the biggest learnings we had, and one of the biggest challenges that we've faced throughout our life, actually, it's not uncommon to technology businesses. There's never enough tech resource. The adage, if you're on top of your roadmap, you're overfunded, or you've got too much money. It would be a lot easier to build the product as it is now if we were starting from scratch now. And the other thing, we actually built the product in flight, which slowed things down. It's a lot easier to build something, get it stood up, and then start selling it. But there are pros and cons to everything, I guess.
Nigel Verdon is a pillar of the London fintech community. Here's his advice for fintech founders. What are you most excited about in fintech, and why?
Fintech's only just started, and we're in the world of like the iPhone. There's going to be a huge amount more innovation. There's also going to be a huge amount more problems arriving as well, which we're going to overcome, like security and other pieces, and some fintech's blowing up and things, and we've got to go through that. But I think we're at the cusp of a change in the value chain of banking.
What advice would you have for someone considering starting a fintech company?
Trust the banks, don't be anti-bank, work with them. I wouldn't be tempted by all the let's do a pilot because you waste your time in pilot hell. Go ahead and build a business. And I would also not be totally trying to take VC money the whole time, be propped up by VC money, go build a decent business model. Because one of the bigger fears I have in the fintech world, most of this industry is propped up by VC money.
What resources would you recommend to people looking to learn more or get ahead in fintech?
Turn up to a lot of the accelerator programs, demo days, and get access to the people who are either building stuff or have got the grey hair and have built stuff, and just make yourself known in the ecosystem. Knock on doors, email, meet. Rather than having just some digital relationship with people, go and meet the people doing it. Because one of the great things about the fintech world is everybody seems to be happy to help each other, even if you're competing. There seems to be a sort of a coincidence of purpose and a great sort of brotherhood or sisterhood to bring people together to do the right thing. Because everybody seems to be focusing on doing the right thing and helping each other, which you need to be part of. I wouldn't do it at a sort of out in the middle of nowhere and just think about it. You've got to be with people.
We caught up with Alex McPherson of Octopus Ventures at an event put on by our friends at Innovate Finance. He shared his views on the immediate future of fintech. What investment themes are you focused on in fintech?
So we look across the thing, and the area of focus that we've had over the last 12 months or so is the shaping of the insurance tech market. I think the insurance industry as a whole has been relatively slow to embrace new technology, and that's changing dramatically. There's lots of people in the chain, and where you have lots of people in chain, there's often areas of efficiency can be brought to bear. Brokers still charge 30%, and where they generate their leads from tends to be the site comparison sites. So, we think there's opportunity for disruption in that area, and so have focused down there.
What advice do you have for fintech founders?
Be really clear about what you want to achieve. So it's about the vision that you want to go and deliver, and then the execution about how you're going to deliver that. But always, our motto is look for the stars, you might get to the moon.
We also spoke with Carolina Brochado of Atomico at the same Innovate Finance event. Here she is. What investment themes are you focused on in fintech?
I think today our view is to look at management teams who are really focused on data and really focused on using that data to create something powerful, because I think challenging incumbents on distribution is obviously incredibly hard. So you have to be doing something on the decisioning and the analytics side that is really powerful in whichever silo you happen to fall into.
Broadly speaking, are there any specific technologies or macro trends that you expect to shape the next few years of startup investing in fintech and otherwise?
Yeah, I'll go back to my point on data, right? I think that if today you're not using data in a clever way, if you don't have a team looking at that, if you don't have some sort of, machine learning or AI component to what you're doing, then you're most certainly going to be left behind. Because I think that if you look at banking, right, with the challenger banks, I think the world's converging, right? Incumbents are getting smarter and are trying to get more nimble and get more technology in there. And startups are starting to partner with incumbents because of the distribution. So I think, the way forward is probably some combination between data, partnerships, and the AI machine learning bend.
What advice would you have for fintech founders?
I think with fintech, one of the things I would say is always think ahead on the regulatory side. Everything's always shifting, and I find that certain entrepreneurs want to arbitrage between the rules today to experience high growth. And I think having a long-term sustainable plan on regulation and expansion, I think thinking global is always nice. And it works better in some business models than others. But I think engaging with the regulator early on is a really good thing to do.
Michael Tresco of 8 Roads has worked across private equity and venture capital in Silicon Valley and London. He shares his views on what's next for fintech. Are there any specific technologies or macro trends that you expect to shape the next few years of startup investing in fintech or otherwise?
So, to get the buzzword out of the way, I think AI, machine learning, and all of those things will increasingly become table stakes when it comes to building technologies, similarly to what we've seen with big data and mobile over the last couple of years. So I'm not necessarily sure there's going to be a lot of AI companies, but I am fairly confident that X years from now, most companies will have a developed AI strategy and will be utilizing the core principles to provide a better product. So I think that certainly we'll see happen. And I think, as with all introductions of large-scale new technologies, that will mean that some incumbents will become vulnerable and open themselves to disruption from newer entrants who are using these technologies effectively, right? So I think that's probably going to happen. And then the other thing that we're continuing to see play out and has been a trend for a while is just the convergence of consumer time spent around mobile devices, right? And so really strong platform shift that similarly creates vulnerabilities for incumbents and allows new players to come in who really operate more effectively around that new platform, right? And then what that means really is that the consumer that likes to engage with a mobile device likes to do so both in their free time as well as at work, which makes it really interesting for enterprise vendors, because they now more and more have to cater to individual consumers and their preferences, a lot of times tied around the mobile, rather than these large unnamed enterprises where one person makes a decision on behalf of many employees, and then you don't really have to care what the individual employees think, right? And so I think that's going to force a significant change in how people think about usability and design. And again, that's going to present some really interesting opportunities where large incumbent vendors will have to realize that the product either needs to change and really be more user as opposed to enterprise friendly, or face disruption from new providers who are really appealing to the end user.
What are you most excited about in fintech and why?
I think fundamentally it's making existing financial service companies more efficient through technology.
If you could do it all again, what would you do differently?
Probably take a few more calculated risks.
In your investments or in your life?
Definitely both.
What advice would you have for someone considering starting a fintech company?
Probably the same as for every other startup, is to really understand what problem you're solving for whom and how much better your solution is versus the ones that are out there.
What resources would you recommend to people looking to learn more or get ahead in fintech?
Very good question. I think it's probably talking to people in the industry. It's attending events and asking all of them that question.
Amaya Upadhyay has an interesting vantage point. He works for Omidyar, which invests across a range of for-profit and not-for-profit segments. His thinking is a nice complement to more traditional VC viewpoints. All right, a handful of rapid-fire questions for you. What are you most excited about in fintech and why?
I think customer centricity and what we can do with the massive amount of data we now have.
What advice would you have for someone considering starting a company focused on financial inclusion?
Don't do retail payments and overestimate acquisition costs.
What resources would you recommend to people looking to learn more or get ahead in fintech and financial inclusion?
Understand more about the financial lives of underserved customers. So look at financial diaries and portfolios of the poor.
The next and last two clips we've included come from recent episodes with Charlie Delingpool and Aman Guy. Our regular listeners may still have these guest words fresh in their minds, but we found their insight immensely valuable and absolutely had to include it here. For those who missed the episodes, I'd highly encourage you to go back and check them out in full. First up is Charlie Delingpool, co-founder of Market Invoice and founder of Comply Advantage. He goes into detail on how he thinks about some of the key technical challenges fintechs face. Are there any lessons from your experience starting and growing Market Invoice that you were able to bring to Comply Advantage? Anything you did differently this time around?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think in terms of the kind of choice of market, I think finally this company is very international. So we have teams in Romania and New York, which is lots of fun. I think in terms of the client base, again, it's kind of very, very broad. In terms of the underlying economic model, it's kind of SaaS, cloud-based. In terms of the team, it's always a cliche that the most important thing in the company is the team, and therefore we fought very hard to attract and retain the best people. I think the lessons from Market Invoice definitely suffuse like every choice we made in the past 3 years.
So you mentioned that you're now kind of getting to the point where the platform has been suitably built following great investment and painstaking development, and you're now kind of flipping the switch in terms of sales and business development. So how do you think about scaling? I mean, what was the experience at Market Invoice and what's your early experience now? I mean, going forward, what will Comply Advantage as a company be doing differently compared to what it's done to get here?
I think the key issue around scaling is the kind of CAC LTV arbitrage, right? In terms of the kind of cost to acquire a user and then how long they stay and how much they pay, right? So to the extent that revenue solves all problems, if you are able to pay a salesperson because what they're bringing to the table in terms of the client base is sufficiently valuable, and in terms of core client maintenance, if it's sufficiently intuitive, then it doesn't require a kind of material customer success overhead, then the scalability should be implicit. So what we've architected in terms of the sales function has been replicated already in the US as well as the UK. So in terms of establishing different pods, in terms of the kind of technical scalability, so I think one problem we face is just the sheer volume of server costs. So because of the volume of information going through the platform, the amount of data being crunched, hopefully if we can adequately refactor the code base to make it less costly in terms of the AWS burden, then I think we should see scalability happening reasonably easily.
This is an interesting topic, and I'm sure that a lot of the audience will get some helpful kind of insight out of this conversation. I mean, you talked about revising the code base now to make it more efficient. To what extent was writing clean, efficient code early on part of the strategy? To what extent was it, let's just get something that works and prove market traction, and then we can revisit later? And in your experience, what are the pros and cons of those two strategies?
Yeah, so I guess in the immediate instance, the specific refactoring we're doing is moving things from instances to containers. So on Amazon, you have this Elastic Compute Cloud, and then you want to move things into containers via the Elastic Compute Service, and then move things from serverless over to things like Lambda and have much more serverless architecture, because the instance cost for spot instances is roughly 10% of the overall cost. So if you can refactor the code base on AWS, then potentially rather than paying £100,000 a month, you're paying £10,000, right? And that's a huge saving. On the broader point, you're completely right. So you want to try and launch a minimum viable product and then try and iterate through that. I mean, and that's since Stephen Blank, that's been orthodoxy back in 2008, right? So I think the kind of analogy for that is, if you're evolving an eye, you start with a light sensitive patch of skin, and then you have a retina, and you have like a ocular socket, and so it simply evolves over time. And what we've seen as well is we have kind of 15 different internal teams and services and platforms, and all those are constantly evolving, right? And I think the kind of go-to-market strategy is as important, but probably less important than the kind of technical strategy. So what we're doing here, we have a 10-year roadmap for, right? In terms of the kind of number of ideas and processes and different areas we want to invest in and improve. So what we're building now is very much kind of only kind of 5% of what we want to build.
No, it's actually a point that I'm personally fascinated by. You start new companies with one starts new companies with the intention of building the best thing possible. You, as you say, start with kind of an iterative approach, minimum viable product, confirm traction to effectively prove that there's an opportunity, attract the necessary resources, and scale from there. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, that people maybe aren't necessarily thinking about on day one is the fact that, okay, once we get to, say, 1, 2, 3 years in, and we've got something that works, that has as you say, perhaps not perfectly efficient cost base, but that some people are using. We've got focuses like generating revenue, perhaps building a sales force. It can be really difficult in poorly managed companies to actually go back and make those fundamental core changes to get to the version 2.0, whatever it is, proposition that's going to take the company from year 2 to year 10. How do you as a founder and manager of this business think about that?
In terms of technical strategy, if you have a legacy platform and trying to migrate onto a new platform, that's very, very challenging, right? So in that respect, you have to avoid things like forks. You have to stay on a single code base. The analogy is the ship of Theseus analogy. What you have to avoid is these kind of big bang updates whereby you suddenly shift on day one over to a whole new platform, right? So if you're a bank and you've acquired all these different platforms, then you have by default 10 different platforms, and therefore if you want to try and compete with an upstart fintech incumbent who's coming to the market, then that's very challenging, right? So yeah, I think lots of different companies often don't have someone who's necessarily making those calls, and yet those calls are critical to the success of the company.
What advice would you have for someone considering starting a company?
I guess the cliched advice is probably also correct in terms of have the best team, ask for help, read all the orthodox material and blogs that are out there. I mean, 10 years ago, there wasn't much information out there for people, whereas now there's a huge amount. So in terms of support, in terms of this podcast, in terms of information, advice people done beforehand, you have vast amounts of information. And so there isn't really any excuse for not using it.
Aman Guy of Orange Growth Capital sat down with us a few weeks ago to walk through a hypothetical business idea. He offers a ton of useful info about how VCs think about investments. If you're going to start something, you've got to know how the other side thinks about things.
So look, I think market size along with team, if it's early stage in particular, is super important, probably the most important. And I think you'll hear feedback if you're an entrepreneur from any VC that has kind of decided not to invest. And one of them could very well be, we don't think the market's big enough. And what they really mean is not that banks don't want to spend money, let's say specifically on a wealth management product because they spend billions of dollars on a wealth management product. Maybe what they mean is banks don't want to replace wealth management products they have right now. We don't see that trend changing. Or they could mean banks don't want to spend as much money as they do right now. So they don't think that your product will be compelling enough for them. So market size is an important element, but it needs to be dissected down into, exactly what dollar spend you're going after, not just a broad-based dollar spend.
Aman shines some light on the enterprise technology procurement process that I found revelatory. What you offer and how you price matters more than you'd think.
It's interesting. If a bank or a financial institution pays you, let's say, $20,000 a year, I personally don't think that's enough of money for them to push you through the procurement process to become an official vendor. There's just not enough in it for them. Obviously, you can't just kind of rock up and say, hey, yeah, I'm actually now charging $1 million a year, because there needs to be clear value. But getting those dynamics right is quite important.
I get you. So you're saying if your product would only cost them potentially $20K a year, then they're not. They would need to go through the procurement process, but they're not going to waste the time.
Exactly.
Hence, they're never going to buy from you.
Yes, or you'll have to figure out another channel to get in to. So you could work with a partner like, let's say, SAP that is already onboarded at a bank, but then you have to think about a whole other set of problems that come with it. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's just a different way of approaching your sales/implementation strategy. The other thing I see a lot, especially in kind of the consumer software world, so like the Dropbox, Evernotes of the world, Slacks, is giving away your product for free. I think that works less in the B2B, pure B2B world, right? I think associating value with your product is extremely important, not only to someone like us as investors, who can then say, okay, I have now a sense of what people are willing to pay for your product, but also from a customer standpoint. If you pay for something, you're generally more likely to take the time to understand how it works and make an investment from a time perspective into developing that product into your organization, as opposed to if it was free. So I'm not saying free is bad, but I think it works for certain markets. But I think for financial institutions in particular, I think that's a very hard proposition.
Aman went on to outline some of the challenges in sustaining enterprise software businesses through development and the first few sales.
So I think the one thing most enterprise software entrepreneurs probably know is enterprise software requires a lot of money. And there are a couple of good reasons for that. The main one is it takes a lot of time for you to actually realize the contract value. So the time from when you actually book a contract, so let's say you book a £1 million contract for 3 years, you're not getting paid £1 million instantly. You're getting that however your contract stipulates, but let's assume ratably over the course of 3 years. But you're spending all your time on that, and you've spent 12 months trying to get that client. So there's a big gap between bookings and cash, and that's an issue in enterprise software. So I think enterprise software businesses generally require a lot more capital than B2C or general, let's say, consumer software businesses. So if I was a founder, I think the first thing I would do is get my product to a stage where I feel I'm comfortable enough to talk to one or two small clients, and in this case, an independent asset manager maybe. Prove out the solution there. Then maybe go out to a couple of angels, high net worths, who are well connected in, let's say, the financial services industry, and raise sufficient money to maybe get one or two clients. I think some people just try to jump into it. It's much easier to do it at a step at a time. So raise sufficient money. You don't want to dilute yourself too much.
And so how much might that be?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. There's no kind of magic number. But I think if it's your first round, you would be diluting yourself too much if you raise more than 2 million. I think at the end of the day, you're the founder. You still want to control the company. You still want to have enough you still want to be incentivized to be at this business long term, work day in and day out. So I think kind of, again, this is just a ballpark number. It could be plus minus, but I think 2 million is a good enough number for you to kind of service 2 big customers after you've proved out in a couple of small customers. And I think once you've done that, you can then kind of go to the market and say, hey, we've had 2 really good proof points. They're ready to go with us. One of the issues financial institutions have with, or anyone has with committing to enterprise software companies is, are these guys well capitalized? Are they going to be around tomorrow? Why am I wasting all this time investing in making their product better? Because they are investing in making a product better if it's early stage, if they're not going to be around tomorrow. So funding is actually very critical for some of these long-term contracts. So I think as soon as you can prove out these 1-2 customers, you can then go out and raise a much bigger round. Now, what that round is a function of how much you want to give up as dilution in your company, what set of investors you're talking to, what their risk appetite is. But typically, kind of Series A, you see, in the 20% range in terms of ownership is what a VC really wants in Series A. So I would work backwards. Is I know a VC wants 20%. This is how much I'm going to raise, and you will have an implied valuation.
Mm-hmm. How would you get from 0 to the starter proposition that you were pitching to those first 1 or 2 small asset managers you mentioned?
So this is where I feel it helps to have at least another person with you on the ride, is to help you balance that out. I think that is the hardest time in a startup. The initial phase is, how do I get to my first customer? Who pays the bills till then? I think if you're very fortunate, and a lot of people are who've done this before, have had a really good track record at building and selling enterprise software, you can raise before you have a product. But let's be honest, not a lot of people are there, especially in Europe, I think, in that category. So it is friends, family, whatever you have. You often see people do small consulting gigs at these asset managers, which is just another kind of way of saying, hey, pay us a professional services fee. We'll try and customize this to your solution, to your requirements. So there are multiple avenues. You kind of have to see what kind of works for you the best. If you have enough money saved, then that could work for you, where you could just focus on building a core software product. If you feel you need money, but no one's willing to back you, maybe think about taking the professional services route. Get a 2-3 month contract. Say, hey, let me kind of build this for you from scratch. Make sure you control all the IP, and kind of take it from there. There are also tons of accelerators that you can go through. Some are great, some are not. But I think at the end of the day, it's really kind of what your risk profile is as a founder.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If you liked today's episode, join our mailing list at bankingthefuture.com. You'll get the occasional email telling you more about what's going on and how you can get involved. Thanks again for tuning in. Catch you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.